Last session, we had the tensions boiling over, and this time we have the wrap up of the first few wars and preparing for the next. First, we got the Old World. Kislev was decisively beaten back and had to resort to scorched earth to make it not worth it for the Bretonnia to take their settlements. Kislev abandoned all of their settlements except their starting province, which made it very unprofitable for Bretonnia to capture them, leaving a few provinces deep no man's land between Bretonnia and Kislev, with the notification that the endgame crisis has been triggered and that Wolfhard and Dark Elves are making their way to the Old World had Bretonnia pull back their forces and march all the way to the west to defend themselves. Dark Elves have been feeling the sting of fighting the Vampire Coast, and we saw Vampire Coast also abandoning their settlements to hurt the economic prospects of Dark Elves. Like that was not enough, they were also burning down the settlements of Dark Elves that were once thought to be safe. Out of nowhere, though, a Black Ark appeared on the horizon with a full army on board in the Old World. The army disembarked, and at first it seemed like it was planning to sack the Dwarven coast, but Dark Elves assured that they were seeking passage to the Empire lands. Besides that, they were mostly quietly growing their economy. Wolfhard also thought that he was finally done with the Vampire Coast, while he clearly wasn't. He was satisfied with the Lustrian gains and decided to pull an interesting move on the dwarves. He first offered an alliance to dwarves, completely out of the blue, and carelessly dwarves signed on the dotted line. Then Wolfhard had pulled a move that I had never seen before. He blackmailed the dwarves and told them either they were to attack Bretonnia or Wolfhard would declare war on Kislev, thus destroying the reliability rating of the dwarves, potentially preventing them from confederating. Dwarves had tried to buy time during this conversation, but at the end of the session, seeing how dwarves did not declare war, Wolfhard pulled the trigger and announced that he would be invading the dwarves. Dwarves had been afraid that their gambit from the last session may have been discovered and have been trying to buy time, but also use their armies to their maximum capacity to sack the settlements where they would have low habitability to fund the growth of the central provinces. During this session, dwarves had finalized the construction of their tier 4 recruitment buildings in their core provinces and were now fielding Ironbreakers, Bugman's Rangers, organ guns, and gyrobombers, with some occasional hammers here and there. With their main armies halfway across the planet, these troops would not be able to make their way to the front. However, a recent ambush by Grimgor left one of the attack vectors weak. As such, the first optimized battalions were on their way to the front in the Darklands. As their first test, they were to take Zarna Grund before finishing off Grimgor, who was beaten back by the garrisons and the remaining troops. In the south, the Tomb Kings have been defeated, and the dwarf investments have started paying off, with over 10,000 gold per turn now being sent to the pirates to fund their fight. This had become a much easier thing to do after hearing the whining of the players and looking at the map. It was clear that the money was not being wasted. The Lizardmen AI, of course, were less than happy with the dwarves were doing at their borders and decided to drop whatever they were doing and attack full force the recent low-tier dwarf settlements, which dwarves rushed to defend so as to not build too many grudges. After that reliability hit, they needed every bit of diplomatic boost they could get. Fortunately, though, Thorek, after fighting side by side with Thorgrim, had agreed to confederate despite the reliability hit, which had greatly expanded the dwarf holdings in the south and gave them access to new landmarks, new territories, and a whole new expansion path. The only faction left to confederate at this point was Karak Kadrin, with Belgar's faction being wiped out before a confederation option. A new threat emerges on the horizon. Vampire Ascendancy endgame crisis has been triggered, and now dwarfs and Bretonnia rush to mount their defensives against the coming storm of the undead. In 10 turns, these two players must mount defenses against 4 aggressive stacks of vampires, which means the plans of invading Ulthuan must be put on hold. Dark Elves and Wolfheart, however, have no such problems, so they can continue their aggressive expansion. Cathay Player has been replaced since the last session, and they have been consolidating their losses. Hopefully they will be relevant in a few more sessions, but otherwise nothing really happened on their front. This whole session has been longer, but the most players have been too busy extinguishing fires and solving economic problems this entire session. So, nothing much happened beyond the usual construction, building, and some basic expansion. Since player versus player wars are almost never profitable, players have tried to maintain their tempo to remain competitive. Any complex chain or faction can be weakened by a strike at its heartland, and at times a good distraction is all that a good economist needs. And so, with that, we've got our top contenders, with at the top being Dark Elves, Dwarfs, and Bretonnia appearing to be the top contenders for victory, and Wolfheart not far behind. While Kislev has only a single province left, and Vampire Coast is still terrorizing the Dark Elves. So join us next time to see how this relative calm develops.